It's time to talk the NFL draft once again on the Our Football Network. And on today's show, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. It's been a couple of years, but David Harrison is back talking Bucs football on the OFN. How's it going, David?
I'm doing great, Greg. I appreciate you having me back on. It has been a little while, so I hope you've been doing well.
I have, and we haven't talked since the Bucs won a Super Bowl, even though they're no longer the defending champs, but still, one right. Super Bowl in the last 2 years is pretty damn good.
Yeah,
a lot of teams would take that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, and by the way, in case anybody is not familiar with who you are and your background and everything like that, just want to remind everybody that you are ex-military, and so of course, awesome that that is part of your bio. And I always want to commend you for that and thank you for your service. And I know you're retired now, so best of luck in the regular world.
Yeah, absolutely. Trying to become just a normal person.
That's it. Good luck with that. Easy. All right, here we go. I tell you what, before we get into the draft, let's talk about what kind of transpired in the last month or so with free agency and cap space and all of that. Is there possibility that when the draft is over, that if the Bucs still feel that they haven't fit the right pieces, and they are one of those teams, there's probably 10 of them in the league every year that feels they have a really good chance of winning the Super Bowl, so they're gonna try to pick up, one of those veterans that jump on board for a year and that kind of thing. Do they have the cap space to do that? And if they do, what position do you think that would be? I know you were looking ahead because the draft isn't here yet, but let's just say that they have not all the picks they made, and they're all going to be rookies anyway. So that's not going to really help them tremendously this year. If they have to go back into free agency after the draft, what position would it be?
I think you're probably looking at defensive line more than anything. And when you look at the fact that Ndamukong Suh is yet to resign, and the Buccaneers really, from everything we can tell, haven't made too strong of a push to get him signed before the draft. You get the feeling that, the situation with Rob Gronkowski is basically in his hands. He's going to make the decision that he's going to make. But I think either way, the Buccaneers are going to go to both position groups in the NFL draft. You're probably looking at a D lineman and a tight end, but at the tight end position, you have much less of a rotational factor than you do at the defensive line. You have 3 starting defensive linemen in your base package under Todd Bowles and his 3-4 scheme. But in reality, you're going to need about 5 or 6 regular rotational pieces and players to fill on that defensive line. So even if you bring back Ndamukong Suh and draft a guy, you're talking Vea, Golston, Sue, and maybe a Devontae Wyatt out of Georgia in the NFL draft. You still need other pieces. Raheem Nunez-Roches is a nice piece, but he can't do it by himself. They did bring back O'Connor as well, or Patrick O'Connor, but I imagine they're going to want to flesh out that position group a little bit. They've made a very big emphasis on finding a way to get a better pass rush presence from their down linemen instead of relying on Shaquille Barrett and guys like Joe Tryon and Shoyinka, the rookie from last year. So I think defensive line is most likely where you'll see the Bucs dip back into the free agent pool after the draft.
Okay, let's take a look at the depth chart, because you're talking about the defensive line and even slash edge rushers, guys that can apply pressure. Because I look here and I really see that. And look, this is what happens too when you're at this point, when you're trying to win a championship and you build your team with a lot of veterans and things of that nature. Looks like the Bucs have got to get young. That's what Sue, as you mentioned, 35, Golston even 33. Pierre-Paul's up there in age. Is he coming back? Pierre-Paul, did he come back already?
That's honestly, he's been kind of the forgotten guy. Nobody's really talked about him. Haven't heard about him taking any visits with other teams. He hasn't officially said he doesn't want to play, but the Buccaneers haven't really officially made their intentions known either. I think he's another just kind of post-draft guy. We'll see what the roster look like, see what the money looks like, and then see if they can make something work.
And then McClendon also at 36 years old. Do you think he'll be back?
I could see Steve McClendon being back, absolutely. But again, it's just going to boil down to where do they fill spots. I honestly think everything with the Buccaneers as far as future moves is kind of in a holding pattern until they figure out how the draft unfolds.
Yep. All right. Now, as far as the draft and the main needs and all that kind of stuff, I got to ask you, obviously, about the quarterback position, because to me, like, my initial reaction is going to be, well, let's see. We came this close to starting the season potentially having to hand it over to Kyle Trask, or we have to make a trade with one of these veterans, whatever. Maybe this is a warning sign that we have to go and get ourselves another quarterback, another young quarterback to battle with Kyle Trask. So we have some insurance. But on the other hand, maybe they really like Trask. Maybe they feel Trask is the guy. And hey, we're trying to win another championship here in the next couple of years. We don't need to throw another top pick away at a quarterback. We need to use that for a priority talent. So what do you think about the quarterback position? Are they kind of done with that and trust the guy and they're not even going to worry about it? Or do you think that this is something that they're going to actually consider?
I think in the draft, I think you're pretty much done. You might see maybe a seventh round flyer taken on a guy like maybe Cohn out of out of Notre Dame. Maybe they really like him and they don't want to run the risk of having to negotiate with other teams for an undrafted contract, so they spend that seventh rounder. But I mean, you've got Brady back for the year. They brought back Blaine Gabbert, Ryan Griffin as well, a long time backup, and like you said, they got Kyle Trask. So you've already got 4 quarterbacks on the roster who know the system. They've got some continuity, and when you look at the situation with the future of the quarterback position for the Buccaneers, we all kind of know what we thought on the outside, but really the key is on the inside. And only they know really, were they panicking with the idea of maybe having to go with Blaine Gabbert or Kyle Trask, or were they comfortable, or were they just kind of like, oh man, this is too early? And if it's one of the last 2 options, if you're other than panicking, if it's one of the last 2 options, then you probably feel pretty good about where you're going. You give Kyle Trask another year to mature, get some NFL coaching, learn under or behind Tom Brady, obviously, and then you probably feel a little bit more comfortable next year. Meanwhile, you take this season and you invest in draft picks that are going to go around the quarterback, whether it be offensive players or bolstering up that defense, so that whoever you input or whoever you place into that starting position in 2023 has a better framework around him to help carry him and his development. So if the Buccaneers really only know that answer, if they were in full blown panic mode thinking Kyle Trask might be the starting quarterback, then it kind of tells you something. But I still don't know if this is the year you pull the trigger on another quarterback just because you do have Tom Brady back and you're kind of doing this one last ride looking for a ring.
Okay, so and even though Arians is gone, Leftwich is there, so that shouldn't interfere at all with the development of Trask.
Not really.
And so, and look, when you go after a quarterback in the second round, even though it's late, you go and you grab a quarterback in the second round, that means that you think that this guy has a chance to be a starter on your team. So
absolutely.
I don't think people should forget that. I think there's would you agree with me that chances are, if Brady were to retire after this season, Trask is the starter in 2023?
I don't know if he is the starter, but I think, I don't sense from the way the Buccaneers were kind of approaching it that they were necessarily panicking. Like, that's kind of going through that. I think it's one of those situations where, there were conversations that they might go after Deshaun Watson. There's actually been a recent kind of proposal, not a team to team, but a media proposal that maybe the Cleveland Browns decide to ship Baker Mayfield off on draft weekend for like a 4th round pick. And maybe the Buccaneers go ahead and do something like that, especially if you trade back from 27 in the 1st round and you net yourself an extra 4th round pick. Maybe you use that 4th and you spend that on Baker Mayfield. So yes, you're using draft capital on a quarterback, but it's not so much in the traditional sense. So, if that's something that comes about, I would have bought into that a little bit more with Bruce Arians, because we know Arians liked Mayfield. He was one of the reasons Arians considered taking the Browns job when it was open before he ended up with the Buccaneers. But with Arians now in the front office, Todd Bowles is the coach, Byron Leftwich is the offensive coordinator. Not sure how much that feeling of Baker Mayfield was spread throughout the coaching staff. So, that's still kind of to be seen. But I don't think the Buccaneers, just by judging, again, the way that they were kind of pursuing the quarterback situation, I don't get a sense of panic there. Whereas when it came time to replace Jameis Winston, it was kind of an all-out blitz. Like, they were doing homework on Teddy Bridgewater. They were doing homework on Tom Brady. Like, pretty much anybody and every quarterback that was possibly available, they were doing homework on. Whereas with this situation, it was like, well, Deshaun Watson, MVP caliber player when he's on the field. Baker Mayfield, there's kind of a speculative thing there, but they weren't in the Carson Wentz conversation. They weren't in the Teddy Bridgewater free agent or the Drew Lock trade conversation. So I don't get the sense that the Bucs were necessarily panicking. I just don't think they were necessarily sold on Trask automatically being the starter either.
And I got to tell you, with Mayfield's shoulder situation and the fact that, like you said, even if he were to get traded, like, because most people are thinking, well, if he's going to get traded, he's going to start for a team. Well, okay, maybe if that's Carolina, whatever. But if it's Tampa, that really, to me, it makes a lot of sense, because then he doesn't have to. It's probably the best interest for him to sit for a year. Get like his career back going on the sidelines. Watch Tom Brady, the greatest of all time. get your health back, get your mind back, and then you could go ahead and be the starter potentially in 2023. So I think that makes a lot of sense. We'll see if it happens. Offensive line. Now, basically, Mason was swapped for Marpet.
Right.
Correct. Okay. So, but Stinney is still penciled in as the left guard. Is
Mhm.
Tampa Bay, is that like okay, if he's the guy, we're okay, but at some point, that is a position that they're going to want to try to upgrade?
Yeah, I think you're going to get an offensive lineman drafted. Zion Johnson's a very popular name
Yep.
in the first round. I think if he's available at 27, he's a guy that you could see come off the board there to the Buccaneers. But it doesn't necessarily mean he's coming in to automatically be a starter. People have to remember Aaron Stinney, Alex Kappa during the Super Bowl run got injured during the playoffs. Aaron Stinney came in and replaced Alex Kappa, and not only that, but started in the Super Bowl and helped the team win. Held up very well on his own. He was actually in the competition to be the starting right guard. Last year, Alex Kappa ended up beating him out. But Aaron Stinney, he's not a new guy to the mix. Shaq Mason is a new guy to the mix. We kind of pencil him in one of those guard positions as well. But, again, a guy like Zion could potentially come in. Really what it does is it basically allows the Buccaneers to not have to force the pick, have to go offensive line no matter what is available. And, you look at a guy like Cole Strange out of Chattanooga and maybe the middle rounds of the draft, you bring him in. Maybe he doesn't win the job, but he provides you valuable depth. So I think either way, you're going to get a contributor there on the offensive line. Just they're not in a position where they have to go round one with it.
Okay, now before we move over to defense, I'm going to take a look at the skill positions and wide receiver with Gage signed.
Yeah.
And you still have guys like Scotty Miller and Perryman, and Tyler Johnson's going to only get better, you would think. So wide receiver looks pretty good. But you mentioned tight end. And I'll say, look, in my mock draft, and I've only done one so far, but my mock draft, and once you get down to the bottom, it's always so much harder to figure out, especially a team like the Bucs.
Yeah.
But I just said, you know what? I don't think Tampa Bay can take the chance on Gronk because, all right, let's say he comes back and says he wants to play. Well, it's probably it's like a year to year. Who knows? And what if he gets hurt? OJ Howard's now gone. So I went ahead and penciled McBride in there. Just, I figured this would be good insurance. So is that something that you think is possible? That even though it may be a little early, even though I don't think it's that early to go bottom of the first round for a tight end, that Tampa Bay would consider that?
It's pretty early, but I mean, at the end of the day, depending on what trade offers you're getting, bringing in a guy who could be a starter for your team, probably not in 2022, but maybe 23, 24, and then the next 5-6 years potentially if he develops and reaches the ceiling that he could. I mean, yeah, you might look at it early on. I mean, when OJ Howard was selected 19th overall, he was called a luxury pick.
Yeah.
And at the time it made sense. He spent 2 years essentially as a backup, but then once he kind of started, really catching on and flashing some of that potential that he had, people really kind of forgot about that luxury pick tag and kind of said, okay, this is a guy that could potentially do some things. Now, some mental errors kind of put him in the doghouse. Some injuries didn't really help out. And then, of course, the arrival of Gronk pretty much put all that away. And that's why he's in Buffalo now. But again, Trey McBride's another guy that if at 27, if you're not getting very good offers for a trade, and guys like Zion Johnson, Devontae Wyatt, and maybe a cornerback that you might want like Andrew Booth Jr. out of Clemson are gone, then maybe you pull the trigger on a Trey McBride and you have that 5th-year option on him. So really, if you don't need him to be a starter this year, then you move forward. I think there's kind of a growing speculation that maybe the Buccaneers already know what's going to happen with Gronk and even Ndamukong Suh and Jason Pierre-Paul, and they're just keeping that under the table because why expose themselves right now? Because the more we know, the more we can kind of point to their draft strategy. If Gronk isn't coming back and they already know it, then I could see the Buccaneers trying to trade down into like the mid-30s to pull the first tight end off the board. But I mean, again, if you're not getting the kind of offers that you want, pulling the trigger on tight end 27 will result in a little bit of backlash, in the immediate aftermath. But as soon as he starts catching touchdowns during the NFL season from Tom Brady, people are going to forget about it.
Yeah. And again, you never know if Gronk doesn't play or, again, if he gets hurt. He is getting older. It's what happens. All right. Defensively, you mentioned cornerback. So let's talk about this because Carlton Davis was re-signed. So that was really a big re-signing for them. But when you look overall at the cornerback position, you do see that there were players like Ross Cockrell who had a lot of reps last year, and I'm not sure if that. I mean, that's okay. He's a good kind of insurance policy type of player who can fill in, but he's not a star, not somebody that you're going to look at down the road. So when you're taking a look at that cornerback position that you just mentioned, is that because the other two players who you talked about, right? Maybe they're there. Maybe I'd be very surprised if both of the Georgia defensive tackles were still around. I think they're both going to be
Mhm.
gone. And who was the other player you were talking about that may be
There was
there?
Zion Johnson, Andrew
Zion
Booth Jr.
Johnson.
Yeah, there's a
His
few.
name seems to be like gaining steam.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so I don't think he's going to be there, but I
Yeah.
do think one of the other two corners will be there.
Mhm.
Elam Booth. So
Yeah.
so which does Booth fit the scheme better? And if both guys are on the board, and it's only those two, and I would assume that those are the top two left, do you just think Booth is a better fit?
It's a little bit it's kind of a scheme dependent thing, right? And really Todd Bowles is the best, and obviously his co-defense coordinators would be the best guys to answer that. For
Yeah,
me, I personally prefer Andrew Booth Jr. Just from an evaluation standpoint in a vacuum. When I look at the Buccaneers defense and what they like the longer, more physical cornerbacks, and I think Kaiir Elam out of Florida kind of fits the mold of what a Todd Bowles defensive back looks like more. So I would go Andrew Booth Jr. I think the Buccaneers would go Kaiir Elam if that makes sense. Either one of
sure.
those guys would be a good solid pick. And something to remember moving into the future: Mike Edwards, Sean Murphy Bunting, and Jamel Dean all were taken in the same draft class. All of them are in the final years of their contracts right now.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, and of course Whitehead's gone.
Yep.
So right now, if you take a look at and now if you look at it though, Ryan and Neal are there, but
Mhm.
those are veteran players,
Right.
so you don't know how much longer they have. Give me a safety then, and I know once you get to this point in the draft, I don't know, especially when you have a Winfield already, if a safety necessarily has to go in the first round. But
Mhm.
let's just say with the Bucs draft capital, they have what pick 60, or let's say they do trade down and they get a little extra capital, so they're picking now maybe mid second or early third. Is there a safety out there that you think that they would have their eye on?
Yeah, I mean Lewis Cine out of Georgia is a big name and a good name to keep an eye on for the Buccaneers. Brings a little bit of a combination of both, but I think he's more of a stronger safety than he is a free safety. Where Antoine Winfield Jr. Gives you that more free safety type of style versus strong safety. Todd Bowles did say before he became the head coach that he does consider Logan Ryan as safety in his scheme. Keanu Neal obviously is expected to revert back to his strong safety roots. So there's a little bit of a need there, but not as much as there was immediately following the departure of Jordan Whitehead.
Okay.
If they don't go first round, I like Jaquan Brisker out of Penn State. I think he'd
Yep.
bring a good flavor to the team. Jalen Petrie, again, he's more of a cover guy, but I really like what he does out of Baylor. Really
Yes.
liked what he did at the Senior Bowl. I view him as a better fit as a safety than a corner. Some people look at him as a corner versus a safety. I think the great thing about Todd Bowles and anybody that grows up under Todd Bowles as a defensive coordinator is they're going to maximize that player's talent. So if Jalen Petrie can do better as a nickel or as a corner, however, in coverage for the Buccaneers defense, or if he does better for them as a safety, they'll make it work. But I think he's got the talent to do whatever they need him to do.
Yeah, I think Petrie to me is like one of the top like hybrid
Yeah.
DBs that you can consider if you're looking, because everybody's looking for that hybrid guy, and I
Yeah.
think he's that type of
Versatility
guy.
is the key.
Yeah, and he's one of the better ones available. Okay, so edge rusher.
Mhm.
Now, if you take a look at it, we just mentioned Pierre Paul and his status, and we know that the talent inside what it is with White and David, of course, but Barrett, who I've been a big fan ever since his Denver days.
Yeah.
Jealous that he ended up outside of my team's purview, but that's why the Bucs are Super Bowl champs, basically, and my team's drafting fifth. But other than that, again, you mentioned Tryon, so he was
Mhm.
brought in last year. It still looks like, and Nelson's a nice player, but
Yeah.
you can never have enough edge rushers.
Absolutely. And Anthony Nelson's a guy that there was a lot of excitement about him a couple years ago and potentially, becoming that starter to replace a guy like Jason Pierre-Paul. I don't know that excitement is really there anymore. I think Anthony Nelson has kind of, firmly solidified his role as a rotational piece, a depth
Sure.
guy. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, you
No.
make a lot of money and have a lot of years in the NFL doing that. But I think when you're the Buccaneers, again, this is another option that you could look first round, you could look at pick 60, you could look at 91, really anywhere the Buccaneers kind of feel like a fit could come in. You could bring another edge rusher in and not so much replace, because I think Joe Tryon Schwenka, if JPP doesn't come back, I think JTS is the new starter opposite Shaquille Barrett, but he's still a second year player.
Sure.
He's still a guy who's getting his NFL feet under him. So you would like to have another talented player there to kind of rotate with him. Yes, Anthony Nelson is there, but if Boye Mafe is available, at a certain point out of Minnesota. He's an attractive option. David Ojabo out of Michigan, given that injury, his stock is going to drop. The Buccaneers have pulled the trigger on injured players before, trying to kind of maximize on that recovery potential versus worrying about the short term and how soon can he get on the field. More like, if you can get David Ojabo back on the field around Thanksgiving, he could give you a nice little boost there towards the end of the season into the playoffs that the Buccaneers could really use. So those are two guys as well. And then even deeper into the draft, if you need to pull the trigger on an edge rusher, there's always going to be a spot for pass rushing in the National Football League.
Yeah, because I was going to ask you, my next question, and maybe Ojabo could have fit this, would be give me a player that is not likely going to be on many draft boards for the Bucs. A surprise kind of player or pick. Like, wow, I'm surprised the Bucs went with that player or that pick.
Yeah, I mean, I think honestly, any edge rusher early would be a little bit of a surprise. I mean, again, we've seen Mafia, we've seen Ojabo. I think Karlaftis is a guy that seems to be like there's some love for him. I mean, in the very early part of this process, he's like a top 5, top 10 pick. Yeah. And then I've seen him in the second and third rounds, and now you're kind of seeing him creep back into the first. Honestly, when I watch Karlaftis, like I don't see anything bad. I just don't see anything that really blows me away, Yeah. But I think he's another kind of like a Trey McBride type of option where if you don't have the trade opportunities or trade offers that you think you should be getting, but you want to fill that spot and you know what's going to happen with Jason Pierre-Paul again. If you know JPP is not coming back, then it makes it a lot easier to pull that trigger and bring a guy like Karlaftis on if he's still available. I prefer a guy like Boye Mafe. Or even the edge rusher out of South Carolina. There's a few more names in kind of the middle part of that class that I prefer. Yeah, and Jason Light has mentioned as well, which is what really has the trade back speculation really cranking. Is he's kind of mentioned how much he really likes the middle part of this class, whereas the top end there's less than 30 players that he estimates have a first round grade.
Yeah, I mean, especially the edge rushers are deep. I mean, if you trade down a little bit and end up with 2 middle round, say second round picks, you can still go edge rusher if you wanted to and get 2 really good players.
Absolutely.
So I'm not saying they're going to do that, but that just shows you I love the depth of the edge rushers in this class.
Yeah.
Okay, so finally, I just want to ask you, because this is also important for people who are filling out their mock drafts and they're looking at players' names and they're going over and they're saying, yeah, but I don't know. I don't think I ever really heard much of this guy, so I think that the Bucs probably need to fill this spot. So give me a player that people don't realize is better than they think and may even be ready to have a breakout. So don't be so sure to think that the Bucs are going to be looking at that position.
I'm going to go with Dameon Pierce, running back out of Florida. He is one of my favorite running backs. In this class. He definitely stood out at the Senior Bowl, which to me is a little bit more impressive because the Senior Bowl is not really an environment where running backs are supposed to stand out. There's not a whole lot of physicality. There's not a whole lot of live reps. So when a running back stands out, it kind of means a little bit more to me than perhaps other people. Dameon Pierce is on the official top 30 visit list for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, as are I think we're up to 7 or 8 running backs right now that the Buccaneers have visited with in the lead up to the NFL draft. So it feels like a situation where we kind of talked about this already, but like the running back class is good enough and spread out enough that the Buccaneers could be in a situation where they say, you know what, we have a position of need that maybe is a little bit more important, but this running back is higher on our board than any of these other guys. So we're going to pull the trigger on that. And I could see Dameon Pierce maybe at 91 or 90 being that pick around that range where his grade is higher than everybody else on the board. And even though there might be a need, say a wide receiver, DB, something like that, they don't like that guy as much as they like a guy like Dameon Pierce, a true 3-down back that I'm not going to say would cut into Leonard Fournette's touches in year 1, but I think would be a bigger contributor than people expect for a mid-round draft pick.
Yeah, I mean, I like Vaughn, but it doesn't have the size or physicality, obviously, of Fournette. And Pierce, as you mentioned, would also be more of a guy that can handle the vigors of a certain amount of reps than maybe Vaughn could. But that would be also a nice compliment. If you have Pierce and you have Vaughn for the future, nothing wrong with that. Right. So, all right. Great job as always, David. What are you doing right now, whether it's podcasts or obviously your articles online? What's available for people to check out to follow the Bucs?
Yeah, so for my Bucs coverage, I got Locked On Bucs podcast still going 5 days a week, and we're doing stuff with WTSP, the CBS affiliate down there in Tampa as well. And then writing for Bucs Game Day, part of Sports Illustrated's family of sites covering the Tampa Bay Buccaneers as well.
And anything available on YouTube, or is it only on?
Yeah. Locked On Bucs is on YouTube as well, yeah.
Excellent. Dave, I appreciate it. I look forward to talking to you before the season begins.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Greg.